The words cut deeper than the November wind whipping across the Montana plains. My brother Ryan stood in our childhood kitchen, champagne glass raised, his voice carrying that particular tone of victory he'd perfected over 34 years. $100,000 for a house, he announced, while I got 40 acres of rocks and regret. Our mother actually applauded. Our aunts nodded approvingly. And me? I stood there holding the deed to land everyone called worthless, feeling the weight of family disappointment settle on my shoulders like fresh snow. What none of them knew, what I was only beginning to discover, was that my father hadn't left me wasteland. He'd left me a fortune buried in plain sight, and a truth that would shake our family to its very foundation. Sometimes the most valuable inheritances don't come wrapped in dollar signs. They come wrapped in faith. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The attorney's office felt like a place where hope went to die. James Thornton had practiced law in Copper Ridge for 40 years, and his office reflected every single one of them. Dark wood paneling absorbed the weak afternoon light. Leather chairs cracked at the seams exhaled dust when you sat down. The whole place smelled of old paper and older promises, the kind that got written in careful script and filed away in metal cabinets that lined the walls like silent witnesses to decades of family drama. I arrived early, as I always did, my hands wrapped around a to-go cup from the Copper Cup even though the coffee had gone cold during my anxious wait in the parking lot. Through the window I'd watched Ryan pull up in his new Range Rover, black and gleaming, the kind of vehicle that announced success before its driver even stepped out. He'd been on his phone, laughing at something, his movements easy and confident. He belonged in rooms like this. I felt like an imposter. My father had been gone for 6 weeks. 6 weeks since the heart attack took him on a Sunday morning while he was out at Ravens Peak Valley, that stretch of land he'd loved for reasons none of us understood. They found him near the old survey shack, his worn compass still in his hand, his face turned toward the rising sun. The doctor said it was instant, that he felt nothing, but I wondered if in that final moment he'd thought about what he was leaving behind, and whether he knew what would happen when his carefully laid plans finally came to light. Ryan swept into the office 15 minutes late, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne and the energy of a man who had places to be. His suit probably cost more than my monthly rent. His watch definitely did. He kissed our mother Patricia on the cheek where she sat already positioned in the chair closest to Thornton's desk, and he clapped me on the shoulder in that way he had, the gesture that could be read as either affection or dismissal depending on your generosity of interpretation. Our mother looked smaller than I remembered, though only 6 weeks had passed. Grief had carved new lines around her mouth, but her posture remained perfect, her silver hair styled exactly as it always was, her disapproval of my jeans and sweater radiating across the space between us without a single word being spoken. She'd made it clear at the funeral that she thought my decision to take a leave from my job at the environmental research firm was dramatic and unnecessary. Ryan had taken 2 days off and returned to his development company. Why couldn't I be more like him? James Thornton entered through the side door, moving with the deliberate slowness of a man who'd learned that rushing never improved difficult conversations. He carried a manila folder and a sealed envelope, and something in his expression made my stomach clench. He'd known my father well. They'd served together on the town planning commission. They'd had coffee every Thursday morning for a decade. And now he had the unenviable task of distributing what remained of Robert Walker's life among the people who'd loved him, or claimed to. He settled into his chair with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep and weary. For a moment, he simply looked at us, his weathered face unreadable. Then he opened the folder and began to read in that particular tone attorneys use, the one that strips emotion from words and reduces love and loss to legal terminology. The will was straightforward in its structure, if devastating in its implications. To Patricia Walker, the family home and a life insurance policy that would keep her comfortable. Some investments, some savings, the kind of financial security that 50 years of careful living provides. My mother nodded, unsurprised. This was expected, appropriate, proper. To Ryan Walker, $100,000, designated specifically for the purchase of his first home. No restrictions, no conditions, just a father's blessing translated into a down payment on the American dream. Ryan's smile was small but satisfied, The expression of a man whose assumptions about his place in the family hierarchy had just been confirmed. Our mother reached over and squeezed his hand, pride evident in every line of her face. And then Thornton's voice shifted just slightly as he came to my name. To Emma Walker, I leave the entirety of the Ravens Peak Valley property, consisting of 40 acres, all structures thereon, and all contents contained within said structures. Furthermore, I leave her my surveying equipment, my field notes, and my compass. May she find what I always knew was there. The silence that followed had texture and weight. It pressed against my eardrums and made my heart beat too fast. 40 acres of scrubland. A falling down shack. Some rusty equipment. Compared to Ryan's clean, simple $100,000, it sounded like exactly what it was. A consolation prize. Pat on the head. Here, Emma, have the thing nobody wants. Ryan laughed. It started as a chuckle, low and almost apologetic, but it grew until it filled the office, bouncing off the wood paneling and the leather chairs and the metal filing cabinets. He wasn't being cruel, not intentionally. That was almost worse. His laughter was genuine amusement at the absurdity of it, at the cosmic joke of our father leaving his daughter rocks and dirt while his son got the foundation for a future. I'm sorry, he said, trying to compose himself, wiping at his eyes. I'm sorry, Em, I don't mean to laugh. It's just God, Dad really did love that wasteland, didn't he? Maybe you can, I don't know, go camping out there? Make it a meditation retreat? You're into that environmental stuff. Maybe there's some endangered beetle or something you can protect. Our mother made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been suppressed laughter of her own. She'd never understood why my father spent his weekends at Ravens Peak. She'd called it his midlife crisis, his expensive hobby, his excuse to avoid social obligations. The land had been a point of tension in their marriage, one of those small fractures that never quite heals but gets papered over by decades of compromise and routine. James Thornton's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in his eyes as he watched me. He slid an envelope across the desk, my name written on it in my father's precise handwriting. This was left for you specifically, Emma. He asked that you read it privately. I took the envelope with hands that trembled slightly, hating that my family could see the emotion I was trying so hard to contain. Ryan was already standing, already checking his phone, already moving on to the next item on his agenda. Our mother was gathering her purse, her face set in that expression I knew so well, the one that meant we would not be discussing feelings or disappointments or anything that might disturb the careful surface of family propriety. In the parking lot, as cold wind cut through my jacket and sent leaves skittering across the pavement, Ryan gave me an actual hug, the kind that felt genuine. Look, he said, his hands on my shoulders, his face earnest. I know it seems like you got the short end here, but Dad was old-fashioned. He probably figured I needed the help getting established, and you'd be fine with something sentimental. You were always his little nature girl, right? Maybe he thought you'd appreciate the land more than money. The generosity in his interpretation made something crack inside my chest. He actually believed what he was saying. He wasn't trying to minimize my inheritance out of cruelty. He genuinely thought our father had given me a meaningful gift, just one that happened to have no practical value whatsoever. In Ryan's world, that made sense. The successful son gets the investment. The dreamy daughter gets the symbol. Our mother kissed my cheek, her lips dry and cool. You'll figure out what to do with it, she said, in the tone one uses to encourage a child who's brought home a disappointing report card. Maybe you can sell it eventually. Someone might want it for hunting or something. I watched them drive away together, Ryan's Range Rover carrying them toward dinner at the nice restaurant on Main Street, the one with white tablecloths and a wine list. I wasn't invited. It was assumed I'd want to be alone to process, to come to terms with my place in the family's financial hierarchy. And they were right, but not for the reasons they thought. I sat in my old Subaru, the heater struggling against the November cold, and opened the envelope with fingers that felt clumsy and thick. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once, and something small and heavy wrapped in cloth. I unfolded the paper first. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma, my father had written, if you're reading this, you've just heard the will, and you're probably feeling like I let you down. Your brother got money. You got dirt. I imagine Ryan laughed. I imagine your mother looked sympathetic but disappointed. I imagine you're sitting somewhere alone right now, wondering what you did wrong, why you weren't worth the same investment. My vision blurred, tears coming hot and unexpected. He'd known. He'd known exactly how this would play. You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. You did everything right. You're the one who came with me to Ravens Peak. You're the one who asked questions about the rock formations and the sediment layers. You're the one who listened when I talked about what the land was trying to tell us. Ryan saw dirt. You saw story. That's why the land goes to you. I'm not a man of many words, never have been. Your mother used to joke that I saved them all up for my survey notes. But I need you to understand something. The land at Ravens Peak isn't worthless. It never was. I've spent 15 years documenting what's there, and I've left you everything you need to understand what I found. Go to the shack. Start with the north wall. Trust the compass. You're going to be tempted to tell Ryan to share this with the family, to try to make peace by dividing whatever you discover. Don't. Not yet. Some people need to learn that value isn't always obvious, and some lessons can only be taught by time and consequence. Your brother is a good man, but he's built his life on surfaces. You understand foundations. That's the difference, and that's why this is yours. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry I'm not there to see your face when you finally understand what I've given you. Trust yourself, Emma. You've always had better instincts than you believed. The cloth-wrapped object was his compass, the one he'd carried for 40 years, the one that had been in his hand when he died. It was brass heavy, worn smooth by decades of use. When I opened it, the needle swung true, pointing north with absolute certainty. I cried then, really cried, my forehead against the steering wheel, my breath fogging the windows. Not because I felt sorry for myself, but because for the first time since the funeral, I felt my father's presence like a physical thing. He hadn't abandoned me. He hadn't chosen Ryan over me. He'd given me exactly what he thought I was ready to receive, and he'd had faith that I would understand. The drive from Copper Ridge to Ravens Peak Valley took 20 minutes on a good day, longer when the roads were slick with early snow. I drove it that evening as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too beautiful for the day I'd had. The road wound through pine forests and past ranches where cattle stood like dark sculptures against the fading light. I passed the turnoff to Ryan's new development project, the sign promising luxury mountain living starting in the low millions, and felt something twist in my stomach. Ravens Peak Valley opened up suddenly, the way Montana landscapes do. All that space and sky and silence rushing at you like a physical force. The 40 acres sat at the base of the actual peak, a rocky outcrop that gave the area its name. To someone driving past, it looked exactly like what Ryan had called it. Wasteland. The ground was rocky and uneven, covered in sparse grass and stubborn sage. A few twisted pines clung to existence where there was enough soil. The survey shack hunched near the center of the property, its wood weathered to gray, its single window dark. I'd been here countless times as a child, trailing after my father as he walked the property with his instruments, taking measurements I didn't understand, making notes in leather journals he kept in the shack. He tried to explain what he was doing, talking about geological surveys and mineral composition and sediment analysis, but I'd been more interested in the ravens that nested in the peak's crevices, the way the wind sounded different here than anywhere else, the strange beauty of a landscape that refused to be pretty. The shack's door stuck, swollen with moisture and time, but it gave way with a hard shove. Inside, the air was cold and still, smelling of dust and old paper. And something mineral and deep. My father's presence saturated the space. His jacket still hung on a hook by the door. His coffee mug sat on the workbench, a ring of old coffee dried in the bottom. Maps covered the walls, geological surveys and topographical charts layered over each other like archaeological strata. The workbench held his equipment, transits and levels and soil sample containers, all neatly arranged and covered in months of dust. I stood in the center of that small space and felt the weight of what he'd left me. Not just land but a life's work. Not just rocks but a mystery he'd spent 15 years documenting. And somewhere in this shack, hidden like all his other treasures, was the answer to what made 40 acres of Montana scrubland worth more than $100,000 in cash. The north wall, he'd written. Start with the north wall. I oriented myself using the compass, feeling slightly foolish but committed. The north wall was covered in maps, but beneath them, I could see the rough wood planks. I started pulling maps down carefully, revealing more wood, more nothing. It took 30 minutes and growing frustration before I noticed it. One plank, about 3 feet up from the floor, had a slightly different color than the others, as if it had been replaced or refinished separately. I pressed against it and it gave slightly, hinged at the bottom. Behind it was a gap in the insulation, and in that gap was a metal box, the kind fireproof safes come in, small and heavy. My heart hammered as I pulled it out and set it on the workbench. It wasn't locked. Inside were 3 leather journals, their covers soft with age, filled with my father's meticulous handwriting and careful diagrams. Beneath them, a folder of official-looking documents with seals and signatures. And on top, a USB drive with my name written on a piece of tape. I sat on the floor with the box in my lap as darkness fell completely outside, using my phone's flashlight to read. The journals documented 15 years of geological surveys, core samples, mineral assays, careful measurements of depth and distribution, technical language I barely understood but could sense the importance of. And again, circled and underlined and emphasized 2 words: rare earth. The documents were mining rights, mineral rights, carefully transferred and notarized over the years, partnerships with exploration companies, letters from geologists at the Montana Bureau of Mines, assay results that meant nothing to me in their specifics but everything in their tone, significant deposits, commercial viability, estimated value pending further analysis. My hand shook as I read one letter, dated 18 months before my father's death. Mr. Walker, your suspicions have been confirmed by our analysis. The lithium deposits alone are substantial, potentially in the range of $40 to $60 million at current market values. The rare earth elements present additional value, particularly the dysprosium and terbium. We would very much like to discuss a partnership for extraction and development. Please contact us at your earliest convenience. $40 to $60 million. The words swam before my eyes. I read them again, certain I'd misunderstood, but the numbers remained stubbornly unchanged. My father had known. He'd known for at least 18 months that this wasteland, this joke, this disappointing inheritance, was sitting on a fortune. And he'd said nothing. He'd let Ryan develop his luxury houses. He'd let our mother dismiss the land as a hobby. He'd let everyone think he was an eccentric old man who couldn't let go of a bad investment. All while he methodically documented proof that would change everything. The USB drive held one file, a video dated 3 months before his death. I had to watch it on my phone, the small screen inadequate for the moment. My father's face appeared, older and thinner than I wanted to remember, sitting in this very shack with these very maps behind him. His eyes were tired but clear, and when he smiled it was sad and knowing and full of a love that made my throat close. Emma, he said, his voice rough the way it got when he was emotional. If you're watching this, you found the journals and you know what's under this land. I imagine you're pretty shocked. I imagine you're wondering why I kept it secret, why I didn't develop it myself, why I'm leaving it all to you instead of splitting it with Ryan. He paused, looking down at his hands, gathering his thoughts the way he always did. Your brother is a good man. I love him. But he's built his life on taking the easy path, on choosing the obvious value, on going for the quick win. He sees a piece of land and imagines what he can build on top of it. You see a piece of land and wonder what's already there, waiting to be understood. When you were 10 years old, you asked me why some rocks sparkled and others didn't. Ryan would have said it's because some rocks are prettier. You wanted to know the geology, the mineralogy, the actual reason. That's the difference between you, sweetheart. Ryan sees surfaces. You see depth. This land has depth. Literal depth, as you now know, but also the kind that matters more. It's taught me patience. It's taught me that the most valuable things are usually the ones people overlook because they're not immediately obvious. It's taught me that sometimes you have to wait years to understand what something is really worth. I'm leaving it to you because I know you'll approach it with respect. You won't just see dollar signs, though there are plenty of those. You'll see responsibility. You'll think about what extracting these minerals means for the land, for the environment, for the community. You'll do the research. You'll make the careful choice, not the easy one. Ryan got money because money is what he understands and what he needs. You got something harder. You got trust. You got responsibility. You got the thing I spent half my life understanding. And I absolutely know that you'll do right by it. He leaned closer to the camera, his expression intense. You're going to be tempted to tell everyone immediately. You're going to want to prove you weren't given the lesser inheritance. You're going to want to show Ryan and your mother that they were wrong about the land's value. Resist that temptation, Emma. Sit with this for a while. Learn what you have. Understand the full picture before you share it. And when Ryan finds out, because he will eventually remember this, his reaction will tell you everything you need to know about who he's become. Some people celebrate others' good fortune. Some people resent it. You'll know which one he is by how he responds to your success. I love you, sweetheart. I'm so proud of who you've become. And I'm sorry I won't be there to see what you build with this gift. But I absolutely know it will be something that matters. The video ended. I sat in the darkness of the shack, my phone's dying battery casting the only light, and felt the full weight of what my father had done. He hadn't just left me land. He'd left me a test for myself and a revelation about my family. He'd left me the raw material for a future I couldn't yet imagine, and the faith that I was capable of imagining it. Outside, the November wind picked up, rattling the shack's walls and sending something skittering across the roof. In the distance, a raven called, its voice harsh and wild. I held my father's compass in one hand and felt its weight, its certainty, its absolute conviction about which direction was true. For the first time since his death, I felt something other than grief. I felt purpose. And underneath that, growing stronger with every heartbeat, I felt anger. Not at my father, but at everyone who'd laughed, who'd pitied me, who'd assumed that because something didn't look valuable, it wasn't. My brother had gotten $100,000 and the family's approval. I'd gotten $40 million and a choice about what kind of person I was going to be. Only one of us had received an inheritance that would actually change our life. Ryan just didn't know it yet. I spent that first night in the shack, unable to bring myself to leave. The temperature dropped to near freezing, and I wrapped myself in my father's old jacket, breathing in the faint scent of his aftershave and the mineral dust that permeated everything he owned. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by the wind and the weight of knowledge, and the strange electricity of standing on the edge of a life that was about to transform completely. By dawn, I'd read through all 3 journals twice, my phone's flashlight growing dimmer with each page. My father's handwriting told a story of patience and persistence that made my chest ache. The first entries dated back 17 years, long before he'd even purchased the land. He'd been hiking in the area, noticed unusual coloring in the exposed rock faces, collected samples out of pure curiosity. The early entries were almost casual, the notes of a man indulging a hobby. But as years progressed, the tone shifted. The observations became more systematic, the language more technical, the implications more significant. He'd had the first samples analyzed at the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology, paying out of pocket, telling no one. When the results came back showing trace elements of lithium and rare earth minerals, he'd purchased the land quietly, through a holding company, so the price wouldn't inflate. Then he'd spent years documenting the full extent of the deposits, bringing in core samples, mapping the subsurface geology, building an irrefutable case for what lay beneath 40 acres of scrubland that everyone assumed was worthless. The methodical nature of it staggered me. My father had been a surveyor, a man who measured property lines and calculated elevations, steady work that paid the bills but never made anyone rich. This project had been something else entirely. This had been vision. This had been faith in his own observations despite having no formal geology training. This had been the quiet rebellion of a man who'd spent his whole life being practical, finally allowing himself to chase something extraordinary. I thought about all the weekends he'd spent out here, the way my mother had rolled her eyes and made comments about his expensive hobby. I thought about the surveying equipment I'd assumed was for his regular work, now understanding it had been repurposed for something far more significant. I thought about the way he'd invited me along, how patient he'd been with my questions, how he taught me to really look at the land instead of just seeing the surface. You have to read the earth, Emma, he'd say, crouched beside an exposed rock face, running his calloused fingers over stone. Everything has a story if you know how to listen. See these layers? Each one is a different time, a different climate, a different set of circumstances. The earth keeps records better than any library. I thought he was being poetic. Now I understood he'd been teaching me the literal skill I'd need to comprehend what he was leaving behind. Every lesson had been preparation. Every patient explanation had been an investment in a future where he wouldn't be here to guide me. The realization made tears sting my eyes again. But this time they were mixed with something fiercer. Gratitude and determination braided together into something that felt almost like courage. As pale sunlight filtered through the shack's grimy window, I pulled out my laptop and used my phone as a hotspot, the signal weak but functional. I started researching everything I could find about rare earth elements, lithium mining, market values, extraction methods, environmental impacts. The information was overwhelming and technical, but I forced myself to read slowly, to take notes, to build a foundation of understanding. Lithium was used in batteries, the kind that powered electric vehicles and stored renewable energy. The demand was skyrocketing as the world shifted away from fossil fuels. Rare earth elements, despite their name, weren't actually that rare, but they were difficult to extract and process, and the global supply was dominated by China. The United States was desperate for domestic sources. Montana had a history of mining, infrastructure already in place, political will to support domestic mineral development. The numbers made my head spin. Conservative estimates suggested the lithium alone could be worth $40 million. The rare earth elements, particularly the heavy rare earths like dysprosium and terbium that my father's assays had identified, could add another $20 to $30 million. We weren't talking about a nice windfall. We were talking about generational wealth. We were talking about the kind of money that fundamentally altered every calculation about what was possible in life. I thought about my studio apartment in Copper Ridge, the one I could barely afford on my researcher's salary. I thought about my student loans, still substantial despite years of payments. I thought about the used Subaru that needed new tires and made a concerning sound when I accelerated too quickly. I thought about every time I declined to join friends for dinner because I was watching my budget, every opportunity I passed on because I couldn't afford the risk. Then I thought about Ryan's Range Rover, his downtown condo in Billings, his tailored suits and expensive watches. I thought about how he'd laughed in the attorney's office, genuinely amused by the cosmic joke of our father leaving me dirt while blessing him with a house down payment. I thought about my mother's sympathetic expression, the way she'd patted my hand like I was a child who needed comfort after coming in last at the school field day. The anger that rose in me wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold and clear and focused. They'd underestimated me my entire life. They'd assumed that quiet meant weak, that thoughtful meant indecisive, that different priorities meant lesser ambition. They'd looked at my father's gift to me and seen exactly what they expected to see because they'd never bothered to look deeper. Well, I thought, closing my laptop as morning light strengthened outside, they were about to learn an expensive lesson about assumptions. But my father's warning echoed in my mind. Don't rush to tell them. Sit with this. Understand it fully first. He'd been right about so much already. I needed to trust that he was right about this too. I needed to resist the immediate gratification of proving everyone wrong, and instead do the harder work of building something real with what he'd given me. I spent the next 2 weeks living a double life. On the surface, I was Emma Walker, the disappointing daughter who'd inherited worthless scrubland and was trying to figure out what to do with it. I showed up at family dinners at my mother's house, smiled politely when relatives asked if I'd decided to sell the land yet, listened to Ryan talk about his development projects and his plans for the house he'd buy with his inheritance. He'd already been pre-approved for a mortgage, he announced over pot roast one Sunday. With Dad's $100,000 as a down payment, he could afford something really impressive. He was looking at properties in the new development west of Billings, the one with the golf course and the mountain views. For bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. He showed us pictures on his phone, swiping through listings with the enthusiasm of someone whose dreams were coming true exactly on schedule. That's wonderful, sweetheart, our mother said, her voice warm with pride. Your father would be so happy to see you settled in a proper home. The implication hung unspoken. Ryan was building a proper life. Ryan was making something of himself. Ryan was the kind of son who made a father's investment worthwhile. I was the one with 40 acres of nothing, still renting, still uncertain, still unable to demonstrate the kind of concrete success that impressed Patricia Walker. What about you, Em? Ryan asked, generosity in his voice because he could afford to be generous. He'd won. Have you thought about what you'll do with the land? I mean, I know Dad loved it, but you can't eat sentiment. Maybe I could help you list it? I know some agents who specialize in rural properties. I smiled and said I was thinking about it, that I wasn't ready to make any decisions yet, that I wanted to spend some time out there first to feel close to Dad. It was the perfect response, exactly what they expected from sentimental, impractical Emma. Ryan nodded sympathetically. Our mother looked vaguely concerned that I was going to turn into some kind of hermit, but she didn't push. What they didn't see was the work I was doing in every spare moment. I'd contacted Dr. Diane Foster, one of the geologists my father had worked with, whose name appeared repeatedly in his journals. She agreed to meet me at Ravens Peak, curiosity evident in her voice when I'd called. She was in her early 60s, weathered and direct, with the kind of competence that came from decades of fieldwork. She'd known my father for years, she explained as we walked the property, had been fascinated by what he was documenting. Robert was one of the most patient researchers I've ever worked with, she said, kneeling to examine an exposed section of rock. Most people want instant results, instant gratification. Your father understood that the earth reveals itself slowly. He took his time, did everything right, built a bulletproof case for what's here. She confirmed what the journals had documented. The deposits were substantial, well distributed, relatively accessible compared to some rare earth sites. The lithium was particularly promising, high-grade material in a geological formation that would make extraction more straightforward than many deposits. The rare earth elements were a bonus, valuable enough to justify their own separate extraction if the lithium proved economically viable on its own. What's it worth? I asked, trying to sound casual, as if the answer wouldn't determine the entire trajectory of my future. Dr. Foster stood, brushing dirt from her knees, and looked at me with sharp eyes that seemed to assess more than just geological curiosity. That depends on a lot of factors, she said carefully. Market prices fluctuate. Extraction costs vary depending on the method. Environmental regulations affect the timeline and expense. But conservatively, if you partnered with the right mining company and negotiated a reasonable royalty structure, you're looking at somewhere between 50 and 80 million over the life of the mine. Maybe more if prices continue trending upward. The numbers were so large they felt abstract, like talking about the distance to stars. $50 to $80 million. From land that Ryan had laughed about, that my mother suggested I sell for whatever I could get, that everyone assumed was the booby prize in the inheritance lottery. Your father wanted you to have options, Dr. Foster continued. He was very clear about that in our conversations. He didn't want you to feel pressured into any particular approach. You could sell the mineral rights outright and walk away with a substantial lump sum. You could lease them and collect royalties over time. You could even partner in the extraction itself if you wanted that level of involvement. The important thing is that you take your time and make the choice that aligns with your values. My values. It was the first time anyone had suggested that I might have values worth considering when it came to something this significant. Ryan made decisions based on ROI and market trends. Our mother made decisions based on what looked respectable to her social circle. But my father had apparently believed I would make decisions based on something deeper, something that would require actually thinking about what mattered beyond just maximum profit. I spent another week researching mining companies, reading environmental impact studies, learning about sustainable extraction methods and community benefit agreements. The more I learned, the more complex the decision became. Mining was inherently disruptive. Even the most responsible operations scarred the land, used tremendous amounts of water, created waste that had to be managed for decades. But the materials themselves were crucial for the transition away from fossil fuels. The lithium would power electric vehicles. The rare earth elements would go into wind turbines and solar panels and the technologies that might actually slow climate change. There was no perfect choice, I realized. There was only the choice I could live with, the one that balanced competing values in a way that let me sleep at night. And unlike my brother, who would have seen only the dollar signs and moved as quickly as possible to maximize profit, I actually had the luxury of time to think it through. The minerals weren't going anywhere. The land was mine, free and clear. Could afford to be deliberate. It was during this period, 3 weeks after the will reading, that I started noticing the truck. It appeared first at the end of the access road to Ravens Peak, a dark blue pickup that didn't belong to any of the neighboring ranchers. I'd driven past it twice before I registered it as unusual. The third time I saw it, it was parked closer to the property line, and I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat, watching the land through binoculars. A cold finger of unease traced down my spine. I called Dr. Foster that evening, described what I'd seen. Her response was immediate and sharp. Don't go out to the property alone anymore. If someone's watching, they might have an idea of what's there. Your father was discreet, but word has a way of getting around in geology circles. There are people who track this kind of thing, who look for opportunities to acquire valuable mineral rights before the owners understand what they have. But I haven't told anyone, I protested. I've been so careful. Your father talked to several mining companies, she reminded me. He had assays done. He worked with consultants. Any one of those connections could have mentioned it to someone else. It only takes one loose conversation for the wrong people to start paying attention. I thought about the documents in the shack, the journals, the evidence of what lay beneath the scrubland. If someone broke in, if they found what I'd found, they could use that information to try to acquire the land through whatever means available. A generous offer that seemed like more than scrubland was worth. Legal pressure. Harassment. The tools available to people who understood the value of something and were willing to exploit an owner who might not. The next morning, I moved everything important from the shack to a safety deposit box at Copper Ridge Community Bank. The journals, the assay results, the mineral rights documentation, the USB drive with my father's video. I kept only copies for my own reference, hidden in places that wouldn't be obvious to anyone searching the shack. If someone did break in, they'd find surveying equipment and old maps and nothing that explicitly revealed the land's true value. But the truck continued to appear, and I continued to feel watched. It was unnerving in a way I hadn't anticipated, this sense of being tracked, of having something valuable that others wanted. For the first time, I understood why my father had kept everything so quiet. Knowledge was power, but it was also vulnerability. The moment you revealed what you had, you became a target. I was so focused on the external threat that I didn't notice the internal one developing until it was almost too late. It started innocently enough. Ryan called one evening, his voice casual and friendly. Hey, I was thinking about Dad's land. Before you decide to sell it, maybe I should take a look? I might know some buyers who'd be interested, and I could help you negotiate a fair price. Family discount on the commission. Something in his tone set off alarm bells, a particular quality of forced casualness that I'd learned to recognize over 34 years of being his sister. Ryan only sounded that relaxed when he was maneuvering toward something he wanted. But I kept my own voice light and said, sure, that would be nice. Maybe we could drive out there together this weekend. We met at the property on Saturday morning, the November sky heavy with the threat of snow. Ryan arrived in his Range Rover, wearing jeans and a quilted jacket that probably cost more than my monthly rent, looking like he was dressed for a photo shoot about affluent outdoor lifestyles. He walked the land with me, hands in his pockets, commenting on the view, the quiet, the kind of buyer who might want this kind of space. You could market this as a private retreat, he said, his eyes scanning the property with professional assessment. Some wealthy guy from Billings who wants a place to escape. Maybe put in a nicer cabin, drill a proper well, bring in utilities. The bones are good, The location's actually pretty solid. You might get more than you think. I made non-committal sounds, watching him carefully. He seemed genuinely helpful, genuinely interested in ensuring I got a fair deal. But there was something in the way he looked at the land, a particular kind of attention that felt more intense than the situation warranted. When we reached the survey shack, he asked if he could look inside, said he was curious what Dad had kept out here all those years. I unlocked the door, my heart beating faster than it should. I'd removed anything incriminating, but I still felt anxious as Ryan moved through the small space, examining the maps on the walls, the equipment on the workbench, the general accumulation of a decades-long project. He picked up one of the soil sample containers, turned it over in his hands, set it down. He studied the maps, traced routes with his finger, asked questions about what the different markings meant. Dad was really into this stuff, wasn't he? Ryan said, a note of something I couldn't quite identify in his voice. All this measuring and mapping and analyzing. Must have spent thousands of hours out here. Kind of obsessive, honestly. He loved the land, I said simply, not taking the bait. He found it peaceful. Ryan nodded, still looking around, still searching for something I couldn't name. Then he said almost too casually, before you sell you might want to have a mineral survey done. Just to make sure there's nothing valuable underneath. There probably isn't, but it would be due diligence. Help you price it right. My blood ran cold. A mineral survey. Why would Ryan suggest that unless he suspected there was something to find? I kept my expression neutral, interested but not alarmed. That's a good idea, I said. I'll look into it. Do you know anyone who does that kind of work? I have some contacts, he said, and now his smile was definitely sharper than before. I could make some calls if you want. Get you a fair assessment. We left the shack together, and Ryan talked about next steps, about marketing strategies and pricing tiers and optimal timing for listing rural properties. But I barely heard him. My mind was racing, trying to understand how much he knew or suspected, and where the information had come from. Had someone from one of the mining companies talked? Had Dr. Foster mentioned something to the wrong person? Had my father's discretion failed in some way I hadn't anticipated? Or had Ryan simply developed the instinct that comes from years of property development, the ability to sense when something valuable was being overlooked? He'd built his career on finding undervalued properties, seeing potential others missed, moving quickly to capitalize before the market caught up. Had he looked at the land our father left me and wondered why someone as methodical as Robert Walker would spend so much time on something truly worthless? After Ryan left, I sat in my Subaru and called. Dr. Foster told her about the conversation. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, "Your brother suspects something. I don't know how much, but he's fishing. You need to move faster than you planned, Emma. File the mineral rights claims, establish clear legal ownership, get everything locked down before he starts digging deeper." But I'm not ready, I protested. I haven't decided what I want to do yet. Then decide, she said, not unkindly but with unmistakable urgency. Because if your brother figures out what's there before you've established clear legal ownership of the mineral rights, things are going to get complicated. Your father left you the land, but mineral rights can be contested, especially if someone can argue they have a legitimate claim, or that the rights were improperly transferred. I'm not saying Ryan would do that, but money makes people do surprising things. I thought about the $100,000 Ryan had inherited, the house he was planning to buy, the life he was building. Then I thought about the $50 to $80 million sitting under land he'd laughed about. Dr. Foster was right. Money made people do surprising things, and I had no idea how far my brother would go to claim what he'd decide should rightfully be his. That night I made the decision. I would file the mineral rights claims immediately, establish unambiguous legal ownership of everything beneath the surface. I would do it quietly without fanfare, but I would do it. And then when everything was secure and irrevocable, when there was no possible way for Ryan or anyone else to challenge my ownership, I would decide what to do with what my father had left me. But I would decide. Not Ryan. Not my mother. Not the mining companies circling like ravens sensing something dead and valuable below. Me. Just like my father had intended. The filing process took 3 days and cost more in legal fees than I was comfortable spending, but James Thornton walked me through it with the same careful precision he'd used for everything related to my father's estate. The mineral rights were filed with the county, publicly recorded but buried in enough legal language that casual observers wouldn't immediately grasp their significance. To anyone looking, it would appear that Emma Walker had simply formalized her ownership of the subsurface rights to property she'd inherited. Standard procedure. Nothing remarkable. But Thornton knew better, and when we finished signing the last document, he looked at me over his reading glasses with something like approval. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. "You're being smart about this. Methodical. That's exactly what he hoped you'd be." "You knew," I said, not a question but a statement. "About what was under the land. He told you." Thornton nodded slowly. "He told me enough. Enough to understand why he structured the will the way he did. Enough to know that you were getting far more than anyone realized. He was very specific in his instructions to me, Emma. If your brother or mother asked about the land, I was to say only what was in the will. No elaboration. No hints. He wanted you to have time to understand the full picture before family dynamics complicated things. Did he think Ryan would try to take it?" I asked, the question I'd been afraid to voice finally pushing its way out. Thornton considered this, choosing his words carefully. "I think your father understood that wealth reveals character. He believed you had the character to handle this responsibly. He wanted to give you the chance to prove him right before anyone could challenge or pressure you. As for your brother, Robert loved him. But he knew Ryan's weaknesses as well as his strengths. The will was designed to give each of you exactly what you needed, even if it didn't look equal on the surface. I left Thornton's office with a folder full of legal documents and a weight in my chest that felt like responsibility and fear, and something approaching excitement all braided together. The mineral rights were mine now, unambiguously and irrevocably. Whatever came next, at least I was starting from a position of legal strength. What came next arrived faster than I anticipated. For days after filing the mineral rights, Ryan called again. This time his voice had an edge I'd never heard before. Something sharp and barely controlled. "We need to talk," he said. "In person. Now." My stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "Just come to my office," he said. "I'll explain when you get here." The Walker Development Group offices occupied the third floor of a modern building in downtown Billings, all glass and steel, and the kind of aggressive contemporary design meant to signal success. I'd only been there once before, shortly after Ryan opened the firm, back when he'd been excited to show me around and introduce me to his staff. That visit felt like it belonged to a different life. A time before wills and mineral rights and the complicated truths that lay beneath 40 acres of Montana scrubland. Ryan's assistant barely looked up when I arrived, just waved me toward his corner office with an expression that suggested family drama was above her pay grade. Through the glass walls I could see Ryan pacing, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing sharply as he talked. When he saw me, he ended the call abruptly and motioned me inside. The door closed behind me with a soft click, sealing us into the kind of conversation I'd been dreading since the moment I'd opened my father's journals. Ryan didn't offer me a seat. He stood behind his massive desk, his face flushed, his carefully maintained composure fractured in a way I'd rarely seen. "When were you planning to tell me?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "About the lithium? About the fact that Dad's worthless scrubland is apparently sitting on a fortune?" The air in Ryan's office felt thin and sharp, like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. I stood there frozen, my mind racing through possibilities of how he'd found out. The mineral rights filing was public record, but you'd have to know where to look and what to look for. Someone had told him. Someone had connected the dots and brought him information he wasn't supposed to have yet. I kept my voice steady, calmer than I felt. "I don't know what you're talking about." Ryan laughed, a sound with no humor in it. He pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slapped it down on the polished surface hard enough to make me flinch. "Don't lie to me, Emma. I had someone run a title search on Dad's property after our visit last week. Standard procedure when evaluating land. And guess what showed up? A mineral rights claim filed just days ago. For lithium and rare earth elements. So I made some calls, talked to some people in the geology department at Montana Tech, showed them the coordinates. Want to know what they told me?" My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. "That it's my land and my business what I do with it." His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jump. "Your land? Dad left you that property thinking it was worthless. He gave you dirt and rocks because he felt sorry for you because you were always his little charity case. He gave me actual money, real value because he knew I'd use it responsibly. And now you're telling me that the whole time, he knew there was a fortune buried out there and he just decided I didn't deserve it?" The pain in his voice caught me off guard. Underneath the anger was something rawer. Something that sounded almost like betrayal. Ryan had built his entire identity on being the golden child, the successful son, the one who made his father proud. The idea that Robert Walker had deliberately chosen to give his daughter the more valuable inheritance undermined every assumption Ryan had made about his place in the family hierarchy. "Dad knew exactly what he was doing," I said quietly. "He left you what he thought you needed, and he left me what he thought I could handle. This wasn't about value, Ryan. It was about character." "Character?" Ryan's voice rose, his composure shattering completely. "You think you have better character than me? You who've been sneaking around behind everyone's back, hiding information, filing claims in secret? That's character to you?" "I didn't hide anything," I shot back, my own anger finally surfacing. "I took time to understand what Dad left me before making decisions about it. That's called being thoughtful, not sneaky. And I filed those mineral rights claims to protect what's legally mine, which I have every right to do." "Legally yours," Ryan repeated, and something in his tone made my blood run cold. "We'll see about that. Dad wasn't in his right mind those last few months. Everyone knows he was getting forgetful, confused. That will can be contested, Emma." And when a court hears that he left his daughter a fortune while giving his son pocket change, they're going to have questions about his mental competency. The threat hung in the air between us, ugly and unmistakable. I stared at my brother, this man I'd grown up with, who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with algebra homework and walked me down the aisle at my college graduation when Dad's back was too bad to do it. I searched his face for some sign of the person I'd thought he was, but all I could see was calculation and wounded pride and a desperate need to rewrite a narrative he couldn't accept. Dad's mind was perfectly clear, I said, my voice shaking now with rage and hurt. James Thornton will testify to that. Dr. Foster will testify to that. Every single person who worked with him on documenting those mineral deposits will testify that he knew exactly what he was doing and why. You can test that, Will, Ryan, and the only thing you'll accomplish is dragging Dad's memory through the mud and proving to everyone that he was right not to trust you with this. Ryan's face went pale, then flushed again even darker. Get out, he said through clenched teeth. Get out of my office. I left, my hands trembling so badly I could barely open the door. His assistant looked up as I passed, her expression carefully neutral, but I could tell she'd heard at least some of the shouting. By tomorrow,